Near Abilene, Kansas, 1877. Travers Ashford believed that sentiment got a man killed. He had lived 25 years on this earth, and the last 7 of them had taught him that survival meant keeping your guard up, your gun loaded, and your heart locked behind walls thicker than any bank vault in Dodge City. The cattle drive from Texas had just ended, and he stood in the dusty street outside the drover's saloon, counting his wages with the grim satisfaction of a man who had made it through another season without needing anyone's help or charity. The June sun beat down on his broad shoulders, and he adjusted his worn Stetson lower over his eyes. Travers was tall and lean, with the kind of athletic build that came from years of hard work, not the soft kind that came from town living. His jaw was square and clean-shaven, revealing a face that women often called handsome, though he paid that no mind. His dark hair curled slightly at the ends where it touched his collar, and his blue eyes had the sharp focus of a man who was always watching, always ready. Trust was a luxury the frontier could not afford. His father had trusted his business partner back in Missouri, and it had cost them everything, their land, their livelihood, and eventually his father's life from a broken heart. His mother had died 2 years later, and Travers had learned the essential truth that governed his existence. Rely only on yourself, expect nothing from others, and never, ever let anyone close enough to matter. What Travers wanted was simple enough: save his wages, buy a small spread of land somewhere far from civilization, and live out his days in solitary peace. No partners to betray him, no family to lose, no woman to complicate things with feelings and expectations. He would work his own cattle, answer to no one, and die alone, which seemed preferable to dying with regrets. The sound of raised voices pulled his attention toward the general store across the street. A heavy-set man in a merchant's apron was gesturing angrily at a young woman standing on the wooden sidewalk, a small stack of supplies at her feet. "I do not care what your circumstances are, Miss Devereaux. Your credit is exhausted. No payment, no goods. It is simple arithmetic." The woman stood with her back straight despite the public humiliation. Travers found himself studying her with the same instinct that made him notice details on the trail, the kind of observation that kept a man alive. She was perhaps 22 years old, slender and fine-boned in a way that seemed almost fragile against the harsh backdrop of Kansas. Her dress was simple calico, faded from washing but meticulously clean and mended with careful stitches. Blonde hair, the color of wheat just before harvest, was pulled back in a practical bun beneath a modest bonnet. Her face held a delicate beauty: high cheekbones, a straight nose, and lips that looked more accustomed to smiling than the thin line they formed now. "I understand, Mr. Henshaw," she said quietly, her voice carrying across the street with a clarity that suggested education beyond the common. "I will make payment by Friday." "You have my word." "Your word," the merchant's laugh was cruel. "Your word will not fill my coffers, girl. These goods are returning to my shelves." Travers told himself it was none of his business. Getting involved in other people's problems was exactly the kind of complication he had spent 7 years avoiding. He tucked his wages into his vest pocket and turned toward the hotel where he had rented a room. "Please," the woman's voice stopped him mid-step, not because it was loud or demanding, but because of something in its tone, a dignity maintained despite desperation. "The medicine is for my sister. She is only 14 and quite ill with fever. I am not asking for charity, merely 3 days' patience. And I am telling you that patience is not legal tender." Travers closed his eyes, cursed himself for a fool, and crossed the street before his better judgment could stop him. He counted out $3 from his wages and held them out to the merchant. "The lady's supplies. I will settle her account." Both the merchant and the young woman turned to stare at him. Henshaw's eyes lit with greed, and he snatched the bills immediately. "Sold, Miss Devereaux, your goods are purchased." But the woman was looking at Travers with an expression that made him deeply uncomfortable. Her eyes were green, he noticed, the clear green of spring leaves, and they held a warmth that seemed to look right through his carefully maintained defenses. "Sir, I cannot accept such generosity from a stranger. I fully intend to repay Mr. Henshaw." "Consider it done." Travers bent to pick up her supplies, primarily because it gave him an excuse to break that unsettling eye contact. "Where are you staying?" "The old Anderson homestead, 4 miles west, but truly I must insist." You are insisting on walking 4 miles carrying this load when you have a sick sister waiting. He kept his voice flat, emotionless. This was simple practicality, nothing more. I will bring my horse around. He did not wait for her to argue, instead walking toward the livery where he had boarded his buckskin gelding. As he saddled the horse, he told himself this would take an hour at most. He would deliver the woman and her supplies, accept no thanks, and be done with it. Simple, clean, no complications. But when he returned and saw her standing there with the afternoon sun turning her hair to gold, something in his chest tightened in a way that had nothing to do with the practical matter of helping a stranger. She smiled at him, a real smile that reached those green eyes, and spoke with genuine warmth. "Thank you, Mr. Ashford, Travers Ashford." He secured her supplies to his saddle, then offered his hand to help her mount. She weighed almost nothing, and he swung up behind her, trying to ignore how she fit against him or the faint scent of lavender that clung to her hair. "I am Clara Devereaux, and you have my sincere gratitude, Mr. Ashford, regardless of your insistence that gratitude is not necessary." They rode west in silence for the first mile. Travers told himself he was maintaining proper distance, but the truth was that her nearness made him uneasy in a way he could not name. She sat side saddle in front of him, carefully keeping a respectable posture despite the awkwardness of the arrangement. "You are with the cattle drive?" she asked finally. "Was. It ended yesterday. Will you be staying in Abilene?" No, he did not elaborate. His plans were none of her concern. Another silence stretched between them, but this time it felt weighted. Finally, Clara spoke again, her voice softer. "My sister Eliza took fever 3 days ago. The doctor says it is not serious, but she needs medicine and rest. Our parents died last winter. Pneumonia took them both within a week of each other. We have been managing on our own since then, but it has been difficult." Travers felt that uncomfortable tightness in his chest again. He did not want to know her story, did not want to feel sympathy for her situation. Sympathy led to involvement, and involvement led to caring, and caring led to the kind of pain he had sworn to avoid. "You have no other family." "An uncle in St. Louis, but we have not heard from him in 5 years. The homestead is small, but it is ours, 20 acres and a cabin that father built. I have been taking in mending and sewing to make ends meet, but this month," she trailed off, and he heard the embarrassment in her voice. "This month has been challenging." The homestead appeared as they crested a low hill. It was indeed small, a log cabin with a sod roof, a leaning barn that had seen better days, and a garden plot that showed signs of careful tending despite the struggling plants. Rail fences enclosed a small paddock where 2 chickens scratched in the dirt. It was, Travers thought, exactly the kind of hardscrabble existence that broke people down. A thin column of smoke rose from the cabin's chimney. Clara slipped down from the horse the moment they stopped, not waiting for his assistance. "Please, come inside. It is the least I can offer after your kindness." "Not necessary. I will just unload these supplies and—" "Mr. Ashford," she turned to face him squarely, and again he was struck by that unsettling directness in her gaze. "In the 2 months since my parents passed, not a single person in Abilene has offered help without expecting something in return. You are the first to show simple human decency. The very least I can do is offer you water and a meal before your return journey." He should have refused, should have unloaded the supplies, tipped his hat, and ridden away without a backward glance. Instead, he heard himself say, "Water would be appreciated." The cabin's interior was dim after the bright sunlight, but scrupulously clean. The furniture was rough-hewn but well-made, and colorful rag rugs covered the packed earth floor. A narrow bed in the corner held a young girl with brown hair spread across the pillow, her cheeks flushed with fever. "Liza," Clara said softly, moving to her sister's side. "I have brought your medicine." The girl's eyes fluttered open, and she managed a weak smile. Did Mr. Henshaw relent? "In a manner of speaking, we had help." Clara began mixing the powdered medicine into water, supporting her sister's head as she helped her drink. The tenderness in her movements, the gentleness of her voice, spoke of a deep love that made Travers look away. He busied himself unloading the supplies, carrying them inside and stacking them neatly on the rough wooden table. Flour, cornmeal, salt pork, and beans, simple staples that would stretch for weeks if managed carefully. And the medicine, which had clearly been the priority. "You have been very ill, Liza," Clara was saying, "but this will help the fever break. You must rest now." When the younger girl had drifted back to sleep, Clara joined Travers at the table. She moved with quiet efficiency, pumping water from an indoor hand pump, a luxury that spoke of her father's skill as a builder, and pouring it into 2 tin cups. "Please, sit," she said. Travers sat, feeling acutely out of place in this small domestic space. He had spent so many years sleeping under stars, eating from a chuck wagon, living in the exclusively male world of cattle drives and bunkhouses. The simple act of sitting at a table in a woman's home felt foreign. Clara took the chair across from him. In the dimmer light of the cabin, he could see the fine lines of strain around her eyes, the way her shoulders carried an invisible weight. She was exhausted, he realized, exhausted and frightened and alone. "How long have you been working cattle?" she asked, wrapping her hands around her cup. "7 years, since I was 18. "That is a hard life, I imagine." "Hard enough," he drank, acutely aware of her watching him. "But honest work. And where is home for you, Mr. Ashford?" "Nowhere in particular. I go where the work is." Something flickered in her expression, a sadness that seemed to encompass more than just her own situation. "That sounds lonely." The observation struck too close to a truth he did not want to examine. Lonely is safe. Safe from what? From disappointment, from loss, from trusting the wrong people. He set down his cup, suddenly wanting to be anywhere but in this cabin with this woman who looked at him like she could see straight through his armor. "I should be going." "Mr. Ashford," Clara reached across the table, her hand stopping just short of touching his. "I meant what I said about repayment. I know $3 is not an insignificant sum. If you could give me your direction, I could send." "Keep it, consider it payment for the water." He stood, reaching for his hat, but her voice stopped him again. "Why did you help us?" It was a simple question, but it carried weight. Travers turned to look at her, really look at her, and something in his carefully constructed worldview shifted just slightly. She was not asking out of suspicion or calculation. She genuinely wanted to understand what motivated a stranger to show kindness. "I do not know," he admitted, and it was the most honest thing he had said in years. Clara stood, and to his surprise, she smiled. It transformed her face, warming it in a way that made his chest ache. "Then perhaps you are not as solitary as you believe yourself to be, Mr. Ashford." He left without responding, mounting his buckskin and pointing it toward Abilene. But as he rode, he found himself looking back at that small homestead, at the thin smoke rising from the chimney, at the struggling garden, and the woman who was trying to hold it all together through sheer determination and dignity. Sentiment got a man killed, he reminded himself, and involvement was a trap that led to pain, but something had shifted, and Travers could not quite convince himself that walking away was as simple as it should have been. Back in Abilene, he took a room at the hotel and tried to settle into the familiar routine of a drive's end, count his wages, repair his gear, find the next job. A rancher north of Salina was hiring for summer work, and that was as good a direction as any. He would leave tomorrow, put Clara Devereaux and her sister and that struggling homestead out of his mind, but sleep would not come. He kept seeing those green eyes, kept hearing that soft voice asking him why he had helped, kept feeling the ghost of her weight against him on the horse, the way she had fit there like she belonged. Sentiment, weakness, complications. He turned over, punched his pillow, and stared at the ceiling. Dawn came too early, and with it, a decision he knew was foolish even as he made it. Instead of riding north toward Salina, Travers found himself at the mercantile, buying supplies he did not need. A sack of seed for a garden, nails and boards, a new hinge for what he remembered as a leaning barn door. Henshaw eyed him with the calculating expression of a merchant who smelled profit. "The Devereaux girl get to you, did she?" "Pretty thing, even if she is penniless." Travers counted out his money with careful precision, refusing to rise to the bait. "How much does she owe you, total?" "Well now, let me see." Henshaw made a show of consulting his ledger. "Counting yesterday's purchase, which you kindly settled, she is still in arrears some $8.40. Been running up that tab since March." Travers laid out $9. "Consider her account cleared. And if she needs supplies in the future, extend her credit. I will guarantee it." Henshaw's eyebrows rose. That is mighty generous for someone you just met. That is business. Do we have an agreement? Indeed we do, Mr. Ashford. Indeed we do. The ride west felt different in the morning light. Travers told himself he was merely seeing to a practical matter. A woman and a sick girl could not manage that homestead without proper supplies. It was simple common sense, nothing more. The fact that his heart was beating faster as the cabin came into view had nothing to do with wanting to see Clara again. She was in the garden when he arrived, her sleeves rolled up and her skirts pinned out of the way, working a hoe between struggling bean plants. She looked up at the sound of his horse, and the surprise on her face was genuine. "Mr. Ashford, I did not expect." She trailed off, wiping her forehead with the back of her hand, leaving a smudge of dirt across her brow. He dismounted, unloading the supplies with deliberate efficiency. "Your barn door is coming off its hinge, and your garden needs better soil preparation." Yes, but I did not ask you to." "You did not ask me for anything." "That is the point." He set down the boards and turned to face her. "I am between jobs, thought I might as well make myself useful for a day or two." It was a lie, and they both knew it. But Clara smiled that warm, genuine smile, and something in Travers's chest loosened in a way that was both frightening and exhilarating. "Then I accept your help gratefully. Though I must warn you that I am a terrible cook, and our accommodations are modest. I have eaten chuck wagon food for 7 years. Anything is an improvement." She laughed, and the sound was like water in a dry creek bed, unexpected and precious. "Come meet Lisa properly, then." She was awake earlier and asking about the mysterious cowboy who brought her medicine. Inside, the younger sister was sitting up in bed, looking pale but alert. Her brown eyes studied Travers with an intensity that reminded him of her older sister. "You are the one who helped us," Eliza said. "It was not a question. I was passing through. Clara says you paid our debt to Mr. Henshaw and bought my medicine and brought her home even though you did not know us at all." Travers shifted uncomfortably under the girl's direct gaze. "It was not much." "It was everything," Eliza corrected quietly. "We had nothing left to trade or sell if you had not." She did not finish, but the implication hung in the air. Clara moved to her sister's side, brushing hair back from her forehead with maternal tenderness. "Do not tire yourself, Lisa. The fever is still breaking." "I feel much better." Truly, but even as she said it, the girl's eyes were drooping with exhaustion. Outside, Travers set to work on the barn with a focus that was part genuine need and part avoidance. The hinge was easy enough. The screws had simply worked loose from the dry wood. He reset them with longer screws from his supplies, then moved on to shoring up a corner post that was leaning precariously. Clara appeared at his elbow with a dipper of water. "You are quite handy with repairs." "My father was a builder before." He stopped, surprised that he had shared even that much. "Before what?" Travers took the water, drinking to buy himself time. He never talked about his past, never shared the details that had shaped him. But something about Clara's quiet presence made the words come easier than they should. Before his partner cheated him out of everything they had built together, forged documents, bribed officials. By the time my father discovered it, there was no legal recourse. The shame killed him, literally. His heart gave out 6 months later. Clara's face softened with sympathy. "I am so sorry, and your mother died 2 years after. By then I had already left, could not stand to see everything falling apart." He handed back the dipper, angry at himself for revealing so much. "Point is, I learned young that trusting people is a fool's game. And yet here you are, helping 2 strangers. Here I am being a fool, apparently." But Clara shook her head. "I do not think kindness is foolish, Mr. Ashford. I think it is the bravest thing a person can do, especially when they have been hurt." She left him to his work, but her words stayed with him as he repaired the barn, then moved to the fence line, then turned his attention to the struggling garden. Each task revealed another: a crack in the water trough, a gap in the chicken coop that was letting in predators, a chimney that needed repointing. A day's work stretched into 2, then 3. Travers told himself he was just finishing what he had started, but the truth was more complicated. Each morning, he woke in the small linta beside the barn and found reasons to stay another day. And each evening he sat at that rough wooden table and shared simple meals with Clara and a rapidly recovering Eliza, listening to their stories and, despite himself, sharing fragments of his own. Clara, he learned, had been educated at a finishing school in Kansas City before her father's investments turned sour. She could recite poetry and play piano, though they had been forced to sell the piano last winter for food money. She spoke French passably and could calculate figures in her head faster than most men with paper and pencil. Eliza was bright and curious, full of questions about Travers's years on the cattle trails. She wanted to know everything: what he had seen, where he had been, what Texas looked like, whether he had ever faced down outlaws or stampeding cattle. Once, he admitted, down near the Brazos. Summer storms spooked the herd in the middle of the night, 2,000 head running blind in the darkness. Took us 6 hours to get them circled and calmed. Were you frightened? Eliza asked, eyes wide. Travers considered the question honestly. Terrified, any man who says he is not scared in a situation like that is lying or stupid. But you stayed and did what needed doing, Clara said quietly. That is courage, Mr. Ashford. Not the absence of fear, but the choice to act despite it. On the 4th day, Travers rebuilt the garden plot properly, digging down to remove rocks and mix in composted straw from the barn. Clara worked beside him and they fell into an easy rhythm, him digging, her following behind to plant the seeds he had bought in town. You have done so much already, she said as they worked. The barn is repaired, the fences are secure, the chimney no longer smokes. You have been more help than I could have hoped for. Still need to fix that section of roof before the next rain, he said, not looking at her. And the well cover is rotting through. Travers, the use of his first name made him pause, his hands stilling on the shovel. When are you leaving? It was the question he had been avoiding asking himself. The job in Salina was long gone, his wages were dwindling, he had no reason to stay and every reason to go. Soon, he said, and was dismayed by how the word felt like a lie. That evening, after Eliza had gone to bed, Clara asked him to walk with her. They moved through the twilight to a small rise beyond the cabin where a pair of simple wooden crosses marked her parents' graves. They loved this place, Clara said softly. Father used to say that land was the only thing a man could truly own, not because of a deed or a title, but because of the work you put into it. The sweat and blood and years that make it yours. Travers looked out over the small homestead. In the fading light, with the repairs he had made visible in the sturdy fence line and the barn door that hung true, it looked almost prosperous. Almost like a home. Why did you bring me here? He asked. Clara turned to face him, and in the purple twilight her eyes were darker, more mysterious. Because I wanted you to understand why I cannot leave, why I have to make this work. This land is all that remains of my family, of the life we built together. Losing it would mean losing them all over again. You will not lose it. The words came out more forcefully than he intended. You are too stubborn for that. She smiled, but it was tinged with sadness. Stubborn does not pay debts or plant crops or fix everything that needs fixing. I know what people in town say, that 2 women alone cannot manage a homestead, that we should sell and move east, find respectable positions as governesses or seamstresses. But this is our home, and I will not surrender it. Then you will make it work. He said it with a certainty he felt in his bones. Clara Devereaux was not the kind of woman who surrendered to circumstances. They stood in silence as stars began to emerge in the darkening sky. Travers was acutely aware of her nearness, of the way the evening breeze carried her scent, of how easy it would be to reach out and take her hand. Why did you really stay? Clara asked quietly. The barn was fixed after the 1st day. The garden by the 3rd. Why are you still here, Travers? It was the same question she had asked days ago. Why had he helped in the first place? But this time, Travers knew the answer, even as he feared it. Because leaving feels wrong. Clara turned to look at him fully, and there was something in her expression that made his heart hammer against his ribs. It feels wrong to me too. You're leaving, I mean. They were standing too close, and the smart thing would be to step back, to retreat to safe distance. Instead, Travers found himself raising his hand to cup her cheek, his thumb brushing across that spot where dirt had smudged her brow earlier. I do not know how to do this, he admitted roughly. I have spent 7 years making sure I did not need anyone. I do not know how to be anything else. Then perhaps, Clara said softly, her hand coming up to cover his, we can figure it out together. Because I do not know how to run a homestead alone, and I do not know how to be anything other than stubborn and independent. But when you are here, it feels less like struggling and more like living. He kissed her then, unable to resist the pull any longer. It was tentative at first, questioning, but she responded with a warmth that made his carefully built walls crumble further. When they finally broke apart, both breathing harder, Travers rested his forehead against hers. I am a disaster of a man, Clara. I have nothing but a horse, a saddle, and what remains of this season's wages. And I am a disaster of a woman with a failing homestead and a sister to raise. We are quite a pair. He laughed, surprising himself. When was the last time he had laughed? I suppose we are. They walked back to the cabin hand in hand, and something fundamental had shifted between them. Travers no longer told himself he was staying temporarily. This was not about finishing repairs or being helpful. This was about Clara and the way she looked at him like he was worth more than his worst memories. This was about Eliza's bright curiosity and the way this small family had made space for him at their table. This was about the dangerous, terrifying possibility that maybe he did not have to be alone after all. The next morning brought trouble in the form of 3 riders appearing on the horizon. Travers spotted them from the roof where he was replacing damaged shingles, and something in his gut clenched with warning. Men did not ride in formation like that unless they meant business. He climbed down quickly, catching Clara as she emerged from the cabin with a basket of laundry. Go inside, he said quietly. Take Eliza to the back room and stay there. Her eyes widened with alarm. What is wrong? Riders coming could be nothing, but I do not like the look of it. Please, Clara, just do as I say. To her credit, she did not argue. She disappeared into the cabin, and Travers checked his revolver, hoping he would not need it but prepared regardless. He positioned himself in front of the cabin, making it clear that anyone approaching would have to go through him first. The 3 men reined in their horses 10 yards away. They were rough-looking, unshaven and trail-worn, with the kind of hard eyes that spoke of familiarity with violence. The leader was a thick-set man with a scar across his cheek and a Confederate cavalry hat that had seen better days. Help you, gentlemen, Travers kept his voice level, his hand resting casually near his gun. This the Devereaux place? The scarred man shifted in his saddle, his gaze taking in the repaired fence, the barn, Travers himself. Who is asking? Name is Caldwell. Me and these boys are working for the Kansas Land Company. They hold a note on this property, and that note is 3 months past due. Clara's voice came from the cabin doorway. That is a lie. My father paid off the mortgage 2 years before he died. I have the deed. Travers turned slightly, trying to keep both Clara and the riders in his field of vision. I said stay inside. Not when they are lying about my property. Caldwell's expression hardened. The lady is mistaken. Kansas Land Company foreclosed on this property last month for non-payment. We have been sent to take possession and escort the current occupants off the premises. Show me the documents, Clara demanded, moving to stand beside Travers despite his muttered curse. Do not need to show you nothing, lady. We have our orders. You got until tomorrow to clear out, or we will clear you out. Travers felt the familiar cold fury that had gotten him through fights and dangerous situations. You are not touching this property or these women. Now turn your horses around and ride back to whatever hole you crawled from. One of the other men, younger with a face pocked by old scars, laughed nastily. Big talk from a saddled tramp. This is not your concern, cowboy. I am making it my concern. Caldwell studied Travers with calculating eyes. You are fast, I will give you that. I can see it in the way you stand. But there are 3 of us, and even if you are as good as you look, you cannot take us all. Want to find out? The tension stretched taut as a rope about to snap. Travers knew with cold certainty that if this went to guns, someone would die. Probably him, but he would take at least 2 of them with him, and maybe that would give Clara and Eliza time to run. Then Clara's hand touched his arm, light but insistent. Please, not like this. Caldwell's thin smile held no humor. Smart woman, tomorrow by noon. After that we will not be so civilized. They wheeled their horses and rode off, leaving dust and danger hanging in the air. Travers did not relax until they had disappeared over the rise. "They are lying about the mortgage," Clara said fiercely. "My father was meticulous about such things. I have all his papers." "Then we need to see those papers." "Now." Inside, Clara retrieved a metal strongbox from beneath her parents' bed. Her hands shook as she worked the key, and Travers covered them with his own, steadying her. "It will be all right. We will figure this out." The box contained the deed, clear and legal, showing full ownership by Marcus Devereaux with no encumbrances. But there was also a letter, dated 6 months before Marcus's death, from the Kansas Land Company offering to purchase the property for $200. "My father refused them," Clara said, scanning the letter. "He wrote back declining their offer. He was quite proud of that, said no amount of money could buy what he had built with his own hands." Travers studied the deed carefully. The paper was good quality, the signatures looked legitimate, and the county seal appeared genuine. "This is solid. If they have a competing claim, they have to prove it in court. They cannot just force you off." "Unless they do not care about the law," Eliza said quietly from her bed. She had been listening to everything, her young face pale with worry. "Unless they just take what they want and worry about legal matters later." It was a sobering observation and all too likely true. This was Kansas, not Boston. Law enforcement was thin on the ground, and possession was often 9/10 of the law in practice. "Then we will ride to Abilene and speak to the sheriff," Travers said. "Get this documented officially." "Sheriff Holcomb," Clara's laugh was bitter. "He is in the pocket of every business interest in town. If the Kansas Land Company wants this property, a legal deed will not stop them." "Then what do you suggest?" "I do not know," the frustration in her voice bordered on desperation. "But I will not let them take what my father built. I will not let them win." Travers made a decision then, one that would have seemed impossible a week ago. "Then we fight, but we do it smart. First, we need to know who we are really fighting, who is behind the Kansas Land Company, and why they want this land badly enough to forge documents and send hired guns." "How do we find that out?" "I know people in Abilene. Trail hands, other drovers, someone will know something." He turned to Eliza. "You feeling strong enough to handle a rifle?" The girl sat up straighter. "I can shoot, Pa taught both of us." "Good. Clara, you and Eliza will stay here and keep watch. Anyone approaches, you fire a warning shot. Do not try to be heroic, just make noise and get to safety. I will ride to town and do some asking around." Clara caught his arm as he turned to go. "Travers, those men are dangerous if you anger them." "I have dealt with dangerous men before." He covered her hand with his, trying to convey a confidence he did not entirely feel. "Besides, I am invested now. Someone has to protect my carpentry work." She did not smile at the weak joke. Instead, she pulled him down and kissed him hard, fierce and frightened all at once. "Come back," she whispered against his lips. "I will. I promise." It was a promise he hoped he could keep. Abilene in mid-afternoon was busy with the usual traffic of cowboys, merchants, and gamblers. Travers made his way to the Drovers' saloon, knowing it was the best place to find men who knew the local gossip and intrigue. He found what he was looking for at a corner table where 3 familiar faces from his last drive were playing cards. Jake Morrison looked up and grinned. "Travers Ashford. Thought you had headed north by now." "Plans changed, I need information." Something in his tone wiped the smile from Jake's face. "What kind of information?" "The Kansas Land Company. Who runs it, what their business is, why they would want a 2-bit homestead west of town." Jake exchanged glances with his companions. "That is an interesting set of questions." "Buy us around, and we will tell you what we know." Over whiskey that Travers could not afford but bought anyway, he learned that the Kansas Land Company was owned by a man named Reginald Thornton, a Boston investor who had never set foot in Kansas but had been buying up property all along the proposed route of the new railroad spur. Property that would become valuable if, when the railroad came through. "Your homestead," Jake said, "is it on the western approach to town?" 4 miles west, good water, flat land." "Then that is why railroad surveyors came through last month. Word is the spur will run within a mile of that property. Anyone who owns land along the route stands to make a fortune selling water and provisions to the construction crews." It made 6 cents. Thornton was not interested in the homestead itself, he wanted the location, and he was willing to use fraudulent claims and hired guns to get it. What about the men who came to the property? 3 writers leader called himself Caldwell. Jake's expression darkened. Rafe Caldwell, he is bad news, Travers. Used to ride with Quantrill's raiders during the war, now he hires out his gun to whoever pays best. If he is involved, this is not just business, it is a threat. I need to know if the county clerk has filed any documents claiming the property for Kansas Land Company. That would be Albert Whitmore. His office is on Main Street, but good luck getting straight answers. Whitmore is as crooked as a dog's hind leg. Travers stood, his mind already working through possibilities. One more thing. If a man wanted to fight a fraudulent claim, who would be the best lawyer to hire? Jake laughed. In Abilene, there is only one lawyer worth a damn, and that is Silas Brennan. But he is expensive and choosy about his clients. Where do I find him? Office above the bank, but like I said, he is choosy. Then I will have to be persuasive. Silas Brennan was a distinguished man in his 50s with silver hair and sharp eyes that assessed Travers from boots to hat in one quick glance. Mr. Morrison sent you, he said, gesturing to a chair. That gives you a better chance than most. What is your trouble? Travers laid out the situation in clear, economical terms. Clara's legal deed, the Kansas Land Company's fraudulent foreclosure, Caldwell's threat, the railroad connection. Brennan listened without interrupting, his fingers steepled beneath his chin. When Travers finished, the lawyer was quiet for a long moment. This is exactly the kind of case I find interesting, he said finally. Railroad speculation, forged documents, hired intimidation. It has all the elements of a proper fight. He leaned forward. However, fighting Reginald Thornton will not be easy or quick. He has resources and connections that extend all the way to the territorial capital. How long? To properly challenge the foreclosure, gather evidence, file the necessary briefs. 3 months minimum, possibly 6. Travers felt his heart sink. We do not have 3 months, Caldwell gave us until tomorrow. Ah well, that complicates matters. Brennan stood, moving to a bookshelf and retrieving a leather-bound volume. What we need is an immediate injunction preventing any action on the property until the legal questions are resolved. I can file that with Judge Harrison this afternoon. It will not stop Caldwell permanently, but it will give us legal standing to call in the marshal if he tries to take the property by force. How much will this cost? Brennan named a figure that made Travers's stomach drop. It was more than he had, more than he could afford. I do not have that kind of money. How much do you have? Travers counted out what remained of his wages. $42. Brennan looked at the bills, then at Travers's face. This woman, the Devereaux girl, what is she to you? Everything, Travers said, surprising himself with the intensity of his own truth. She is everything. The lawyer smiled faintly. Then we will call this a retainer and work out the rest later. But understand this, Mr. Ashford, if we fight this case, you need to be prepared for a long battle. And Caldwell is not going to wait patiently while we argue law. I understand. Good, meet me at the courthouse in 1 hour with Miss Devereaux and her deed. We will get Judge Harrison's signature on an injunction before the close of business. Travers rode hard back to the homestead, relief and worry warring in his chest. An injunction would help, but Jake's warning about Caldwell kept echoing in his mind. Men like that did not care much about legal niceties. Clara and Eliza were both watching from the cabin porch when he arrived. The relief on Clara's face when she saw him was almost painful in its intensity. You are safe, she breathed, and he realized she had genuinely feared he would not return, safe and with news. We need to get to Abilene immediately. I found a lawyer willing to fight the foreclosure. Hope flared in her eyes. Truly. Truly, but we need to move fast. They made the trip in Clara's small wagon, Eliza insisting she was well enough to come along. Brennan was waiting at the courthouse with papers already drawn up. Judge Harrison, an elderly man with a reputation for fairness, reviewed the deed and the lawyer's arguments with careful attention. This appears to be a clear case of attempted fraud, the judge said finally. I am signing an injunction preventing any action on the Devereaux property until a full hearing can be held. That will be scheduled for," he consulted a calendar, 8 weeks from today. In the meantime, Miss Devereaux retains full rights and possession of her land. Clara's hand found Travers's and squeezed tight. It was a temporary victory, but a victory nonetheless. "However," the judge continued, "I am also issuing an order for Mr. Caldwell and his associates to appear before this court to show cause why they should not be held in contempt. Threatening legal property owners is not acceptable behavior, regardless of who is paying their wages." Outside the courthouse, Clara seemed to wilt with relief. "Thank you," she said to both Brennan and Travers. "I do not know how I can ever repay." "Keep your homestead," Brennan said kindly. "That is payment enough. Now I suggest you file copies of this injunction with the sheriff and the land office. The more official eyes on this matter, the less likely Caldwell is to try something stupid." But as they walked toward the sheriff's office, Travers felt the familiar prickle of warning along his spine. He turned, scanning the street, and found Caldwell leaning against a post outside the saloon, watching them with cold calculation. Their eyes met across the dusty street, and Caldwell's smile was a promise of violence. He touched 2 fingers to his hat brim in mocking salute, then disappeared into the saloon. "He knows," Travers said quietly. Clara followed his gaze. "The injunction will not stop him, will it?" "Not if he is smart about it. All it does is give us legal protection. But out on that homestead, 4 miles from town, we will be on our own if he decides to make trouble." "Then what do we do?" Travers made another decision that would have been impossible 2 weeks ago. "We prepare to defend what is ours, and we do not give him any excuse to claim we started trouble." The ride back to the homestead was quiet, each of them lost in thought. The sun was setting by the time they arrived, painting the cabin and barn in shades of gold and amber. It looked peaceful, Travers thought, deceptively so. That night, after Eliza had gone to bed, Travers and Clara sat on the porch steps watching the stars emerge. His arm was around her shoulders, and she leaned against him with a trust that still amazed him. "I never thanked you properly," she said softly, "for staying, for fighting for us." "You do not need to thank me." "Yes, I do, because you had every reason to ride away. You owed us nothing. But you stayed anyway, and you have given us hope when I thought we had none left." Travers turned to look at her, this woman who had somehow slipped past all his defenses and made him want things he had thought impossible. "You asked me why I stayed, that first night you asked me." "I remember." "I stayed because for the first time in 7 years, being alone seemed worse than taking a risk. I stayed because when I look at you, I see everything I thought I did not deserve." He cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs tracing her cheekbones. "I stayed because I am falling in love with you, Clara Devereaux, and that terrifies me more than any gunfight ever could." Her eyes shimmered with unshed tears. "I fell in love with you the moment you counted out those dollars for my sister's medicine without expecting anything in return. I just did not know what to call it yet." He kissed her then, slow and deep, pouring 7 years of loneliness and fear into the connection. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Clara rested her forehead against his. "What are we going to do?" she whispered. "About Caldwell, about the railroad company, about all of this." "We are going to fight." Together, he kissed her forehead, her cheeks, the corner of her mouth. "And when this is over, when your land is secure and the threats are gone, I am going to ask you to marry me." She laughed, the sound breaking on a sob. "You cannot ask me now. I am a traditional man. First, we save your home. Then I court you properly. Then I ask your sister for permission since she is your only family. Then, if you are foolish enough to say yes, we build a life together." "That sounds like a very complicated plan." "I am a complicated man." "Yes, you are." Clara kissed him again, soft and sweet. "But I think I like complicated." The attack came 3 nights later, exactly as Travers had feared. He woke to the smell of smoke and was out of his linta with his gun drawn before his mind fully caught up to the danger. The barn was on fire, flames licking up the dry wood of the walls. Clara and Eliza stumbled from the cabin, coughing from smoke that had started to seep through the walls. Travers grabbed a bucket and ran for the well, but he knew it was already too late. The barn was going to burn. Then he saw them, 3 shadows on horseback at the edge of the firelight, watching. Caldwell's voice carried across the distance. "Tomorrow you leave, or next time it is the cabin." Travers's gun was in his hand, his finger on the trigger, and for a moment the rage was so intense he could taste it, but Clara's hand on his arm stopped him. "Do not," she said urgently. "That is what he wants, an excuse to shoot you and claim self-defense." She was right, but it cost him everything to lower the gun and watch those shadows disappear into the night. They worked until dawn trying to save what they could, but the barn was a total loss. In the gray morning light, the destruction was complete, their shelter for animals gone, the winter feed Travers had stored there destroyed. Clara stood looking at the smoking ruins, her face streaked with ash and tears. "They are going to win," she said quietly. "We cannot rebuild this. We cannot fight them indefinitely. We are not beaten yet. Look at it, Travers, they burned our barn and will probably burn the cabin next. The legal fight will take months, and how do we survive that long? How do we protect ourselves against men who do not care about laws or decency?" Eliza emerged from the cabin with a bundle of clothes. "I will go to town. Mrs. Peterson said she needed help in her boarding house. I can work there and send money back." "No," Clara's voice was sharp. "You are 14 years old. You are not working as a servant because these criminals burned our property." "Then what do we do?" the girl's voice broke. "Just wait for them to burn us out completely." Travers looked from one to the other, these 2 women he had somehow become responsible for, who had given him a reason to care about more than just survival. An idea was forming, risky and potentially disastrous, but the only option he could see. "We do not wait," he said. "We take the fight to them." Clara looked at him sharply. "What do you mean?" "I mean we need to force Thornton's hand, make him show himself and his fraud publicly. Brennan said it would take months to build a legal case, but what if we could prove the fraud faster?" "How?" Travers turned to face them both. "Caldwell is the weak link. He is a hired gun, not a true believer. Men like that are loyal to money, not principles. If we can turn him, get him to testify about who paid him and what they ordered him to do, the whole scheme collapses." "And how exactly do you propose we turn him?" Clara's skepticism was evident. "We offer him something better than what Thornton is paying him. We offer him a way out that does not end with him in jail or worse." "That is insane." "Probably, but do you have a better idea?" The silence that followed was answer enough. Finally, Eliza spoke up, her young voice determined. "How do we find him?" "Leave that to me," Travers said. "But I will need you both to promise me something. If this goes wrong, if I do not come back by tomorrow sunset, you take this injunction and you ride to the territorial marshal in Topeka. Do not try to stay here alone." Clara's face was pale. "You are not going to come back if you try to negotiate with a killer." "I will come back," he pulled her close, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "I promise you I will come back. But I need to know you will be safe if something goes wrong. I am coming with you." "No, Clara, you need to trust me on this. Caldwell will not talk if he thinks he is being cornered by a group, one man alone offering a deal. That he might listen to." It took another hour of arguing, but finally Clara agreed, not because she was convinced, but because she could see no alternative that did not end in more violence. Travers loaded his revolver, checked his rifle, and saddled his buckskin as the sun climbed higher. Before he mounted, Clara caught him and kissed him hard, desperately. "If you get yourself killed, I will never forgive you." "Fair enough." He found Caldwell exactly where he expected, at a rough camp 5 miles south of Abilene, where the other 2 riders from that first confrontation were playing cards by a small fire. They all reached for their guns when Travers rode in, but he kept his hands visible and his voice calm. "I am here to talk, not fight. 5 minutes of your time, Caldwell. That is all I am asking." Caldwell studied him with those cold eyes, then nodded to his companions to lower their weapons. "You are either brave or stupid, Cowboy, maybe both." "Tog." Travers dismounted slowly, careful to keep his hands away from his gun. "How much is Thornton paying you to run off Clara Devereaux?" "None of your business." $100, $200. Whatever it is not worth what is coming." That got a reaction, a slight narrowing of Caldwell's eyes. and what is coming. The law of federal judge. Questions about why a Civil War veteran is burning buildings and threatening women on behalf of a crooked land scheme. Travers pulled out a copy of the injunction and tossed it to Caldwell. That is signed by Judge Harrison. It makes every action you take against that property a federal crime, and when, not if, when this goes to trial, you will be named as a co-conspirator in fraud and arson. Caldwell read the document, his expression unreadable. So you got a piece of paper means nothing out here. It means everything if the territorial marshal gets involved, and he will because Judge Harrison is asking questions now. Questions about who is behind Kansas Land Company and why they are using violence to acquire property they do not legally own. You are bluffing. Am I? Go ask around Abilene. Silas Brennan is not just any lawyer, he has connections all the way to Washington. He is looking for a case to make his reputation, and railroad fraud is exactly that case. Travers took a step closer, lowering his voice. Think about it, Caldwell, you are the visible face of this operation. When it falls apart, and it will fall apart, whose name will be on the warrant, not Thornton's, yours. For the first time, doubt flickered across Caldwell's scarred face. What do you want? Testimony. You tell the judge who hired you what they told you to do, copies of any documents or payments you received. In exchange, Brennan will argue for immunity on the arson charge. And if I refuse? Then you are looking at 10 years in a federal prison. Maybe more if anyone was hurt in that fire. Travers held his gaze steadily. You are a survivor, Caldwell, I can see that. You did not make it through the war and everything since by being stupid, so do not be stupid now. Take the deal. The silence stretched between them, broken only by the pop and hiss of the campfire. Finally, Caldwell spat into the dust. One condition, I want it in writing from Brennan himself. Full immunity, signed by the judge. Done. Meet me at his office tomorrow at noon with whatever proof you have. If you are lying to me, Cowboy, I will hunt you down and kill you slow. If I am lying, you will have the right to try. Travers rode back to the homestead with his heart pounding and his hands shaking from adrenaline. It had been a massive gamble, and there was every chance Caldwell would not show or would show with guns instead of testimony. But it was the only play he could see that did not end in more violence and destruction. Clara met him at the property line, having apparently been watching the horizon for hours. She nearly pulled him off his horse with the force of her embrace. You are alive. Thank God you are alive. Did you doubt me? Every single second you were gone. She pulled back to look at him, her green eyes fierce. What happened? He told her everything as they walked back to the cabin, where Eliza was waiting with equal anxiety. Both women listened in stunned silence. He agreed. Clara's voice was disbelieving, just like that. He agreed to consider it. Whether he shows tomorrow is another question. Travers rubbed his face, exhaustion suddenly crashing over him. But I think he will. He is smart enough to see which way the wind is blowing. And if he does not show, then we are back where we started, minus one barn. That night none of them slept much. They took turns keeping watch, waiting for another attack that never came. By the time the sun rose, they were exhausted and anxious and hoping desperately that Travers's gamble would pay off. The ride to Abilene seemed to take forever. Travers kept scanning the horizon for signs of Caldwell or his associates, but the road remained clear. At Brennan's office, the lawyer had already drawn up immunity papers, his expression grim. This had better work, Ashford. If Caldwell does not show, we have tipped our hand for nothing. He will show. But as the clock ticked toward noon, Travers began to doubt his own certainty. What if Caldwell had decided the risk was too great? What if he had ridden to Thornton to report the attempted turncoat deal? What if... The door opened and Caldwell walked in, alone, carrying a leather satchel. Let us see this immunity agreement. Brennan slid the papers across his desk. Caldwell read them carefully, his scarred face impassive. Finally, he signed. All right, here's what I know. What followed was a devastating account of corporate fraud and intimidation. Caldwell produced letters from Thornton's representatives outlining the plan to acquire properties along the railroad route, forged foreclosure documents, and payment records showing bribes to the county clerk Albert Whitmore. He detailed instructions to harass and intimidate homesteaders to make their situations untenable until they sold or abandoned their claims. The Devereaux place was not the first, Caldwell said flatly. There have been 6 others in the past year. Thornton's people would wait until they found property they wanted, then create a paper trail showing unpaid debts or failed mortgages. Most folks could not afford to fight, so they left. Brennan was writing furiously, documenting everything. This is exactly what we need. With this testimony, I can file criminal charges against Thornton, Whitmore, and everyone else involved. How long before the trial? Clara asked. With this evidence, we can move much faster. 2 weeks to prepare charges, maybe another week to get it before Judge Harrison. The lawyer looked up with something like triumph in his eyes. This changes everything. Over the next 2 weeks, events moved with startling speed. Albert Whitmore was arrested for his part in the fraud, and his arrest led to 3 more arrests of Kansas Land Company representatives. Reginald Thornton, safely in Boston, could not be touched directly, but the complete collapse of his Kansas operation and the looming criminal charges effectively ended his influence in the territory. Judge Harrison moved the hearing up on his calendar, clearly eager to address what was becoming a significant scandal. The courtroom was packed when the case was called, with townspeople and homesteaders who had heard about the fraud eager to see justice done. Brennan presented Caldwell's testimony, the forged documents, and a devastating pattern of criminal conspiracy. The defense attorney, brought in by Thornton's representatives, tried to argue that their client had been misled by local associates, but the evidence was overwhelming. Judge Harrison's verdict was swift and decisive. The foreclosure against the Devereaux property was voided, Clara's deed was confirmed as the only legal claim, and criminal indictments were issued for everyone involved in the scheme. Whitmore was sentenced to 5 years in prison. Caldwell, thanks to his cooperation, received probation and was ordered to leave Kansas. Outside the courthouse, Clara seemed almost dazed. It is over. It is actually over. It is over, Travers confirmed, his arm around her shoulders. What do I owe you, Mr. Brennan? She asked the lawyer. For everything you have done. Brennan smiled. Mr. Ashford's retainer covered my initial fees, and the notoriety this case brought my practice is worth far more than any additional payment. Consider us even, Miss Devereaux. Eliza, who had attended the whole proceeding with wide-eyed fascination, tugged at Clara's sleeve. Does this mean we can rebuild the barn? Yes, Clara said, and suddenly she was laughing and crying at the same time. Yes, we can rebuild everything. The rebuilding took the rest of the summer. Travers worked from dawn to dusk, cutting timber and framing a new barn that was larger and sturdier than the old one. Neighbors who had heard about the case began stopping by to help, men from town who brought tools and labor, women who brought food and encouragement. Jake Morrison and his trail hand friends spent a week helping with the heavy work. Figured we owed you, Jake said with a grin. You gave us all something to talk about besides cows and cards. As the barn rose from its ashes, other improvements followed. Travers rebuilt the chicken coop properly, extended the garden, and dug a new root cellar for winter storage. Clara and Eliza worked alongside him, their hands becoming calloused and strong. But it was not just the physical rebuilding that happened that summer. It was the way Travers found himself looking forward to mornings, because it meant coffee on the porch with Clara. It was the way Eliza had started calling him by his first name and asking his advice like he was an older brother. It was the way this place, this hardscrabble homestead with its difficult soil and endless work, had started to feel like something he had never allowed himself to want. It felt like home. One evening in late August, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the prairie in shades of gold and crimson, Travers turned to Eliza. I need to ask you something. Formally. The girl looked up from the book she was reading, her brown eyes curious. All right. Your sister is the most stubborn, fierce, beautiful woman I have ever met. She is also the kindest, which is saying something given how difficult I made things when we first met. He took a breath, suddenly more nervous than he had been facing Caldwell. I would like your permission to ask her to marry me. Eliza's face broke into a huge smile. It is about time. I have been waiting for you to work up the courage for weeks now. Clara's laugh was somewhere between embarrassed and delighted. Eliza. What, it is true. You have both been dancing around it like. I am going to go check on the horses, Eliza announced, standing up with exaggerated purpose. I expect this porch to have some good news by the time I get back. She disappeared toward the barn, leaving Travers and Clara alone in the fading light. He took her hands, his heart pounding. I know I am a disaster, he said quietly. I know I came here with nothing but a horse and a bad attitude. I know I spent 7 years convinced that being alone was safer than caring about anyone. But you changed that, Clara. You changed everything. Her eyes were shimmering with tears. Travers. Let me finish, please, he squeezed her hands gently. I was wrong about what made a man safe. It is not walls or distance or refusing to care. It is finding someone worth being vulnerable for, someone worth fighting for, someone worth building a life with, even when that life is hard and uncertain and full of challenges. You are that person for me. You and Eliza both. This place, this land that your father built and that you refused to surrender, it is worth fighting for because it is yours. But more than that, it is worth fighting for because it can be ours. If you will have me. He released one of her hands to pull a simple gold band from his pocket, nothing fancy, but honestly purchased with what remained of his wages. Clara Devereaux, will you marry me? Will you let me spend the rest of my life proving that kindness is not weakness, that caring is not foolish, and that the best thing I ever did was stop that day in Abilene when a stubborn, beautiful woman needed help? Clara was crying openly now, but she was also smiling with a joy that made her face luminous. Yes, 1,000 times yes, though I should warn you that you are getting a terrible bargain, one stubborn woman, one precocious teenager, and a homestead that needs constant work. Sounds perfect to me. He slipped the ring onto her finger, and then she was in his arms and he was kissing her with all the hope and fear and desperate love that had been building for months. When they finally broke apart, Eliza's voice carried from the barn. Is it safe to come back yet? Yes, Clara called, laughing. Come meet your future brother-in-law. The wedding took place in late September, just as the prairie grass was turning gold and the air carried the first hints of autumn's chill. It was a simple ceremony in the small church in Abilene, attended by what seemed like half the town. Silas Brennan gave Clara away, and Jake Morrison stood up as Travers's best man. Eliza, in a new dress purchased specifically for the occasion, beamed throughout the entire service. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, the assembled crowd cheered loud enough to rattle the church windows. The celebration afterward was held at the homestead, which now looked prosperous with its new barn and freshly painted cabin. Tables had been set up outside, laden with food brought by neighbors and friends. Someone had brought a fiddle and dancing commenced as the sun set. Travers found himself standing slightly apart from the festivities, watching it all with a sense of wonder that still felt fragile. All these people celebrating him and Clara, all this joy built on the foundation of what had started as simple kindness to a stranger. Clara appeared at his elbow, slipping her hand into his. She was beautiful in her simple white dress, her blonde hair adorned with wildflowers that Eliza had gathered that morning. Having regrets already, Mr. Ashford. Not a single one, Mrs. Ashford. He pulled her close, marveling at how natural it felt to call her that, though I am still trying to figure out how I got this lucky. Luck had nothing to do with it. You chose to help when you could have ridden past. You chose to stay when you could have left. You chose to fight when it would have been easier to walk away. She reached up to cup his face. You chose us, Travers, and we chose you right back. Best decision I ever made. Mine too. They danced as the stars came out, surrounded by friends and family, and the beginning of the life they would build together. When the last guests finally departed and Eliza had retreated to her room, Travers and Clara stood on their porch looking out over land that was legally, officially, permanently theirs. What are you thinking? Clara asked, leaning against his shoulder. I am thinking that 7 years ago I thought I knew exactly what my life would be. Alone, moving from job to job, trusting no one and needing nothing. I thought that was safety, I thought that was survival. And now I know I was wrong about everything. The only thing worth surviving for is having something to live for, and you gave me that, Clara. You and this place and the family we are building. You disarmed every defense I had just by being kind when I did not deserve it." She turned to face him fully, her green eyes serious in the moonlight. "You deserved it, Travers. You always deserved it, you just had to learn to believe that." "I am still learning." "Then it is a good thing we have the rest of our lives for you to practice." He kissed her then, slow and deep, and it tasted like promises and possibilities. Like a future he had stopped believing in years ago, now spread out before them like the prairie under an endless sky. The years that followed were not without challenges. Droughts came and had to be weathered. Harsh winters tested their resolve. The work of maintaining a homestead was constant and demanding, but they faced it together, Travers and Clara and Eliza, who grew into a remarkable young woman and eventually married a neighboring rancher's son. They expanded the property slowly, adding cattle and a few horses. Travers took occasional work on cattle drives, but he always came home. Home was not a concept anymore. It was a place, real and solid, built with his own hands and held together by love he had once thought was a weakness. 5 years after their wedding, Clara gave birth to a son they named Marcus, after her father. 2 years later, a daughter followed, Grace, with her mother's green eyes and her father's stubborn determination. The cabin was expanded to accommodate the growing family, and the homestead prospered. On their 10th anniversary, Travers stood in that same spot on the porch where he had first kissed Clara, watching their children play in the yard while his wife worked in the garden that now flourished with vegetables and flowers. The railroad had come through just as predicted, and with it had come prosperity to the region. But unlike Thornton's vision of exploitation, the community had grown together, supporting each other. Eliza and her husband visited often, and the cabin rang with laughter and the chaos of family gatherings. The isolation Travers had once craved seemed like a half-remembered dream, something from another life. "You have that look again," Clara said, joining him on the porch and slipping her hand into his with the easy familiarity of a decade together. "What look?" "The one where you cannot quite believe this is your life." He smiled, pulling her close. "Can you blame me? Some days I still expect to wake up on a bedroll under the stars, alone and convinced that is the way it should be. And instead you wake up to children jumping on the bed and a wife who snores." "You do not snore." "I absolutely snore." "You are just too polite to say so." She laughed, the sound as warm and genuine as that first day in Abilene, "but I am glad you are here to hear it. Nowhere else I would rather be." It was true in a way that Travers could not have imagined possible 15 years earlier. The young man who had believed that trust got you killed, that caring meant weakness, that survival meant solitude, he was gone, transformed by the simple act of accepting kindness and daring to offer it in return. Clara had not just disarmed him with her kindness. She had shown him that there was something worth more than the armor he had worn for so long. She had shown him that the courage to be vulnerable, to let people in, to build something together was the greatest strength of all. As the sun set over their land, painting the prairie in those familiar shades of gold and crimson, Travers Ashford held his wife close and watched their children play. The frontier was still wild, still unforgiving in many ways. But it was no longer lonely. It was full of life and love and the daily miracles of a family built on the foundation of choosing each other, again and again. He had thought he knew what he needed to survive. But Clara had taught him something better. She had taught him how to live, and that made all the difference.